This episode is sponsored by Origami Risk, an award-winning, adaptable, cloud-based platform that can help you and your business manage all aspects of resilience, such as risk, safety, insurance, and even the management of business continuity and disaster recovery plans. Visit origamirisk.com/resilience. Enjoy the episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Resilience Pod, the podcast helping you become resilient in our world full of disruptions. You're here with me, your host, Reena Singh. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Today's topic is about economic resilience with my next guest, who is a very sought after advisor on economic recovery. She was listed as Forbes' next 1,000 entrepreneurs to follow twice. She is the top 50 international COVID thought leader, a global GovTech influencer. Wow. She's also a leading woman in business as proclaimed by Delaware's Today magazine, and so much more. But if I spent the whole time talking about how amazing she is, we would not have a podcast. So without further ado, please welcome to the pod, Kirsten McGregor. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Reena, for having me. And I should be on this more often just to make me feel better about myself.
Well, that's it's my pleasure. You are welcome. Very impressive accolades there. Really excited to get into this topic that we've never covered on the pod before, all about economic resilience. And I know, guys, if you're watching or listening, you might kind of hit the snooze button, or you might think, oh gosh, it's really boring. But I think just give it a chance, because it's really important to what we're going to discuss today is for you to take away and maybe learn something new and do something about it. So my very first question to you, because let's just get into it. What is economic resilience or economic resilience?
It's more of a focused type of economic development. So think about your county, your country, your state. Economic development is a number of verticals: workforce development programs, business attraction, site selection, utilities for businesses to relocate, innovation and entrepreneurship, having accelerator programs and access to capital for small businesses. But the resilience part comes into play typically following a major economic disruption or natural disaster. So they start recovering, and then they need to adapt a resilient mindset, because resilience isn't something that you have, it's something that you do, and making those decisions in the long term, making those decisions and priorities based on all the moving parts and all the different sectors. So that's a high level summary. There's a lot to it, but that's what economic resilience is.
Okay, really interesting, and something I personally probably have never really thought about until I actually consciously tried to think about it. So that's really interesting to know. One of the questions I would like to ask you is, well, you've kind of given us a definition of what it is. How can we measure economic resilience?
And that's a great question, because what I just said, resilience isn't what you have, it's what you do. Yeah. And it's funny because a few years ago, after Harvey, what was that, 2018, and we were starting to look at resilience, a data dashboard and scorecard to measure resilience. And I've been researching this with my team for a couple of years now. And if it's something that you do, that can't really be measured. However, if you look at the foundation that's there, you can measure things like that. So think about where you move or you want to have a job. It's based on quality of life. So it's those quality of life indicators, and that's where that cross-sector part comes into economic resilience. It's looking at your utilities, the governance structure, taxes, schools, education, crime, any sort of quality of life indicators there. Those are high-level, big picture. But typical economic development indicators are ones we see across the board: are per capita income, unemployment, and bankruptcies and business licenses. So there's a number of ways and it should be different at different communities. But those are some high level things. But I think what people don't realize is it's not just those economic indicators, because people want to see how much is energy costing here?
Yeah.
There's different moving parts that go along with that.
Wow. And that's so interesting and so broad, isn't it? It's quite nuanced as well, depending on what type of economic like measure you're looking at. Energy is like massive and big deal in the UK at the moment with prices going up and cold winters and so forth. But hey, I'm going to stop there because we could talk about that in another podcast. We've got a flavor of what we mean by economic resilience, and we're starting this off. We're resilience professionals. How can we embed the concept and this economic resilience with other resilience disciplines such as emergency management or business continuity?
Right. And it's funny because when people, for years now, I've been doing this for focused on the resilience part since about 2012. I've been in economic development for over 20 years, but people think business continuity when they think of economic resilience. And that certainly is a part, but that's in the private sector, right? And what we try to do is support small businesses embrace business continuity and have those support systems in place for small businesses, because they're, as you know, they're the ones that take the brunt of economic disruptions and natural disasters. But I've had to explain this to a number of people that there, and this is where you had another podcast where you mentioned something about this. I wish I remembered which one, but that there's fatigue, right? And then people are getting drained in our industry. And I think part of the problem is everybody's getting looped into. So people in response, people in recovery, people in resilience, they're all different types of expertise. It's not to say that you can't do all of them, but I think that what we need to start bringing in more professionals, one focused on response, and which means right after the emergency room, meaning mentality. And then once people are stabilized, once the economy is stabilized, then you embrace recovery. Now, the two groups need to go on simultaneously, but and need to talk to each other. But I think that we are overwhelming our emergency managers. We are overwhelming our business continuity professionals with things that are just either outside of what they should be focused on, because they can't do everything. And I think that we need to expand that to having different types of professionals collaborating and working together, but having different focuses: recovery, resilience, response, preparedness, emergency management. They are related, of course, but they're also different.
And I love that you say that, like working together and collaborating, because that's what, if you look at resilience as a discipline, that's what it all encompasses, isn't it? It's not just one discipline. So that's really useful to know. And a tip for all of us to take away is, are we kind of getting in touch with different people within our organization who are doing things and collaborating? So something for you all who are watching or listening to think about. Now, Kirsten, really insightful there. I understand just from what you've said in these few minutes that economic resilience is quite important, but I kind of want to make it really obvious to those who might be listening or watching us. So I have another question for you is, well, why do we need to consider it in the first place?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think part of the previous question of people actually talking to each other, what we're seeing is, and I'm sure it's nation across the globe, that there's duplication of efforts. So whoever's doing this type of work in the transportation division, they're not talking to the people who in the energy division and all of them. And that's where the econ, we always call it econ, the econ people are able to look at all those moving parts. But to the bigger point is, even with this pandemic, we've all been resilient, and the economy in general, I think, has been surprisingly resilient than what was anticipated. However, it's the small businesses, the micro businesses that are and this is always the case, they're disproportionately impacted for a number of reasons. So if we don't think about economic resilience, you're going to have a whole section of the economy just gone. And we have seen that data. So maybe the big ones and the big private sector is okay, but the smaller, whether they're mom or pops, whether they're just small micro businesses, maybe some of those initial loans that went out by different governments help, but they can't sustain forever. So I think it's thinking about those small businesses, and at least in the United States, as a whole, they're the biggest employer. So then that goes back to workforce. So it's all related.
Yeah, it's just a very good why, isn't it? Now, what is the consequence if we don't consider this?
So the businesses you're going to have that pretty much those small businesses that employ these people are going to shut down. I mean, we've already seen it, especially in the hospitality and tourism industry. So if we don't have that mindset, we're also going to just start wasting, and this is government, we're just going to start wasting funding. I think there's a lot of talk and not actual action being placed here, but billions of dollars are going towards this. So I think it needs to be strategic rather than wasting funds. So I think it's that workforce component. You're going to have displaced workers, and that resilience is looking at the future. So being able to adapt to how trends are. So our downtown's going away for real estate. Do we need to now adapt our mindset on how we look at that? Anyway, so there's a lot of things, but I think the biggest consequences are your workforce is going to relocate. They're going to go to where the jobs are. And consequently, the small businesses could have a devastating effect on just local economies.
And that's so important, isn't it? Especially the workforce, because all the technology in the world, you still need people. And then the small businesses, we rely on, it's not just the big organizations, we rely on small businesses too. And the pandemic has taught us that, hasn't it? Like when you can't get to big supply chains or like stores, you rely on the small guys, and that's equally important too, the area that you're living in too. So it kind of just got all these thoughts in my head when you were saying that about, wow, this is quite important and a huge consequence really if we don't think about it. Now, we've understood so far what economic resilience is, how we, like some of the ways we can measure it, how we can tie it into our resilience disciplines, why we need to consider it, and some of the consequences if we don't. My next question to you, Kirsten, is, well, what are the top 3 things, according to you, that now I should do as a resilience professional to start the economic resilience discussion in my business going forward and actually drive some change?
Yeah, and I think it's important not only for your business that you work for, but also the industry. So and I've only recently with the pandemic started seeing more involvement with economic resilience. It was like pulling teeth to get people involved because they don't have time, right? It's like insurance, like you don't need it till you need it. And what happens is if they don't have a seat at the table, and maybe we can retroactively think back 2 years. What are the effects on your business with different lockdown policies or different policies that were enacted? But because the government wasn't necessarily informed on how your business runs, or that it wasn't just about, you can't shut us down. There are different ways that you could have they could have executed the lockdown, but they didn't know that information because either these industry organizations, so the Restaurant Association of Delaware, or maybe they weren't as involved before the pandemic, and now they're involved, but different industries were hit in different ways. So I think the first thing is to make sure that you have a seat at the table, even if you're taking turns, by advocating, not necessarily lobbying, but advocating and having that situational awareness of what's going on with government and how they look at this. And it's not just and we're seeing, right, it's not just the emergency response and preparedness plan for your area, it's also looking at your economic development, and I know it's called different things in different places, but looking at the different agencies and what they all have, some of them are outdated, but they all have strategies and plans for this. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is having that mindset of whatever industry or your business is in, that looking at that cross sector, the impact of education and transportation, like and we learned this in the pandemic, right? That if their kids are home because of a lockdown, but that they can't leave even if your business opens up. So and then let's say anything, if it's a natural disaster, understanding the transportation strategy. So it's not just whatever is in your industry. I think it's thinking bigger because that impacts your workforce and it impacts your business continuity plan too. I mean, I'm sure they do. I don't want to. I'm sure they do think about this, but it's looking at those other industries in the bigger picture, because I don't think before the pandemic we were doing that. And I guess the third is also embracing economic development in general, and making sure. And this again is more of an advocacy type thing, but looking at workforce development and how that impacts your industry, looking at the different programs and policies that are in place. You know, and I know it's not sexy, but the utilities that we talked about, and understanding like if they're trying to do offshore wind or solar, what does that mean for your industry and your business? So I think there's going to be some overlap with business continuity professionals, and then perhaps the policy people in that office and the lobbyists to start talking to each other some more. So it sounds like a lot of what I'm saying is let's just start talking to each other. I mean, I know it's impossible to align everything, but I think we've started, if there's silver linings, I think we're starting to go in the direction where at least we're all having more awareness how this section or this group and what they do can impact what we're planning on doing. So it's that mindset too.
Yeah, I love that, because you say it, so it just sounds so simple as talking to each other, but often or not, businesses are quite siloed, aren't they? Especially big ones, and we don't talk to each other, and that's why these situations occur. There's no horizon scanning, there's no looking outside the business and what affects it and how are you affecting the wider community. And we think about that, like, as a resilience professional? A question to all you who are either watching or listening: have you in your day job just consciously just taken a moment and thought about the wider impacts of what you're doing, or what the business that you're working in is doing to your local economy, or just whatever, you know? Have you thought about it? Something to ponder on. And if you have, great, drop me a note, drop Kirsten a note and tell us what you've been doing. If this is incorporated into your programs and you're actively involved in it, or you're in a kind of a steering group, or you just have a keen interest in it, also let us know. Because to be honest, Kirsten, I haven't really heard any other resilience professionals talk about this, because we're just so busy doing the firefighting and not getting a chance to step back and think a bit more strategically. And it's not until kind of we came into contact and I've kind of gone searching for this that I think, oh yeah, there is someone who's dedicated her whole life and career to this, which is quite interesting. Now, we've covered so much in such a short space of time, and it's really just piqued my interest in it, and I want to find out more. So, but we're kind of running out of time, and I want to really thank you for giving us your insights. Before we close off though, do you have any final thoughts for our audience to take away?
Well, again, I think there's silver linings with the pandemic, and for meeting people like yourself, and looking forward to meeting people in person again. But I do think thinking about mindset rather than actions, it's cheesy, but it's true. And that I don't think we can all do everything. I mean, I know enough about mitigation. I know enough about emergency management and preparedness. Like I could go after that type of work, especially if it involves the economic side. But resilience and just traditional economic development, that's what I know. Same for your industry. Not everybody should be doing everything, and then it starts turning into spaghetti at the wall, and then you're not really doing anything. And I feel like I think we're all exhausted too, because we're being asked to do things that just aren't in our wheelhouse. But I do think this whole resilience concept is becoming more norm than it was 10 years ago because of the pandemic. So that's sort of my takeaway. But I do love how more and more people are just engaging and getting involved and talking to each other and listening to podcasts and reading. It just is great. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure. Thank you so much. Really great insights for all of us to take away. So thank you again, Kirsten. And guys, Thank you. If you have been watching us or listening, I am truly grateful. Let me know what you think about this. And like Kirsten said, this isn't an advocation to say that you as a resilience professional need to go away and like be responsible for all of this, because we can't do everything, but just understanding what this means and being aware is the first step. So if this has been interesting or has given you that eye opener, then please do like and share this and spread it far and wide to your resilience network and get that message out there, and find those people within your business who are responsible for doing this and talk to them. And if you want to know more, then connect with Kirsten. All her details will be in the description boxes to find out more if you need any more advice. So that's it for today on the Resilience Pod. This is me, your host, Arena Singh, saying thank you for tuning in with our guest, Kirsten McGregor. Until next time, keep on investing in your resilience.